The morning sun cast long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawns of Riverside Academy as Maya Johnson stepped out of her mother's old Honda. She took a deep breath and looked up at the impressive brick buildings that would be her new home for the next 2 years. Everything about this place screamed money and tradition, from the ivy climbing the walls to the students walking by with their designer backpacks. Maya's scholarship letter was folded carefully in her backpack, a reminder of why she was here. She had worked incredibly hard to earn this opportunity, spending countless hours studying and preparing for the entrance exams. Her family had made sacrifices too. Her mother worked double shifts at the hospital, and her father took on weekend jobs to help cover the expenses that the scholarship didn't. They believed in her dreams, even when those dreams seemed impossibly big. As she walked through the main entrance, Maya noticed the stairs. She was used to being one of the few black students in advanced classes, but here at Riverside Academy, she felt like she was under a microscope. The hallways were filled with students who looked like they had stepped out of a catalog, their uniforms perfectly pressed, their confidence radiating from every step they took. "You must be Maya," said a friendly voice behind her. She turned to see a tall boy with kind eyes and a warm smile. "I'm David. I'm supposed to show you around today." David had been assigned as her student guide, and Maya was grateful to have someone to help her navigate this new world. As they walked through the halls, David pointed out the different buildings and explained the school's traditions. Riverside Academy had been educating the children of the wealthy and powerful for over a century. The walls were lined with portraits of distinguished alumni, most of whom had gone on to become senators, judges, and CEOs of major corporations. "The teachers here are pretty intense," David explained as they passed the faculty lounge. "They expect a lot from everyone, but they also provide amazing opportunities. We have some of the best programs in the state." Maya nodded, trying to absorb all the information while also dealing with the curious looks from other students. She had always been confident in her abilities, but this environment was unlike anything she had experienced before. The pressure to prove herself felt heavier with each passing moment. Their first stop was the main office, where Maya picked up her class schedule and locker assignment. The secretary, Mrs. Peterson, was polite but brisk, clearly busy with the start of semester rush. Maya's schedule was packed with advanced courses: calculus, honors English, AP history, chemistry, and music appreciation. Music appreciation? Maya asked David as they walked toward her locker. "Oh, that's with Mrs. Hartford," David said, and something in his tone made Maya look at him more carefully. "She's been here forever. Really knows her stuff about classical music, but she can be—" He paused, searching for the right words. "Let's just say she has very high standards." Maya's locker was in the junior hallway, surrounded by students who had known each other for years. As she fumbled with her combination, she could hear snippets of conversations about summer vacations in Europe, new cars for 16th birthdays, and college prep courses at exclusive programs. It was a world she had only seen in movies, and now she was living in it. Her first few classes went smoothly. The teachers were demanding but fair, and Maya found herself excited by the academic challenges ahead. Her classmates were mostly polite, though she could sense their curiosity about her background. During lunch, she sat with David and a few other students, who seemed genuinely interested in getting to know her, rather than just satisfying their curiosity about the new scholarship student. "So, what made you choose Riverside?" asked Lisa, a girl from her English class. The question seemed innocent enough, but Maya could sense the underlying assumption that she wouldn't normally belong in a place like this. "The academic program," Maya replied simply, "and the opportunities for college preparation." She didn't mention the scholarship, though she suspected most people already knew about it. News traveled fast in a small school community. As the day progressed, Maya began to feel more comfortable. The academic work was challenging but manageable, and she was starting to see why her parents had been so excited about this opportunity. The resources available here were incredible compared to her previous school. The science labs were state-of-the-art, the library was extensive, and the teachers were clearly experts in their fields. Finally, it was time for her last class of the day, music appreciation. Maya had always loved music, though she had never taken a formal class about it before. She was looking forward to learning more about the technical aspects of composition and music history. The music room was located in the arts wing, a beautiful space with high ceilings and excellent acoustics. Various instruments were displayed around the room, including several violins, a piano, and other classical instruments. Maya took a seat in the middle of the classroom, her notebook ready for whatever the lesson would bring. Mrs. Hartford entered the room with an air of authority that immediately commanded attention. She was a woman in her 50s with silver hair pulled back in a perfect bun and clothes that spoke of understated elegance. Her eyes swept across the classroom, taking note of each student, and Maya felt those eyes linger on her for just a moment longer than the others. "Welcome to music appreciation," Mrs. Hartford began, her voice clear and precise. "In this class, you will learn about the great traditions of classical music. We will study the masters, Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, Chopin, and you will come to understand what separates truly great music from mere noise." As Mrs. Hartford continued her introduction, Maya found herself genuinely interested in the subject matter. She had always been drawn to classical music, even though she had never had formal training in it. There was something about the complexity and emotion in those compositions that spoke to her in a way that other music didn't. "Music is not just about entertainment," Mrs. Hartford continued. "It is about discipline, tradition, and respect for the masters who came before us. It requires dedication and, quite frankly, a certain level of cultural sophistication to truly appreciate." Maya shifted slightly in her seat. There was something in Mrs. Hartford's tone that made her uncomfortable, though she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. She decided to focus on the positive aspects of the class and looked forward to learning more about the composers and their works. When Mrs. Hartford began discussing Bach's contributions to Baroque music, Maya found herself completely absorbed. She had always been fascinated by the mathematical precision of Bach's compositions, the way he could weave multiple melodic lines together to create something both complex and beautiful. Without thinking, she raised her hand. "Yes?" Mrs. Hartford said, looking slightly surprised that a student would interrupt her lecture. "I was just thinking about how Bach used counterpoint in his fugues," Maya said. "The way he could take a simple theme and develop it through all those different voices. It's like he was creating a musical conversation where each part responds to the others, but still maintains its own identity." The classroom fell silent. Mrs. Hartford's eyebrows raised slightly, and Maya could see something flicker across her face. Surprise, perhaps, or maybe something else. The other students turned to look at Maya, some with curiosity, others with the kind of look that suggested she had somehow overstepped. "That's an interesting observation," Mrs. Hartford said finally, her tone carefully neutral, "though I think you'll find that truly understanding Bach's compositional techniques requires years of study and proper musical education." Maya felt her cheeks warm. She had meant her comment as enthusiasm for the subject, but it was clear that Mrs. Hartford had interpreted it differently. She nodded and settled back in her seat, making a mental note to be more careful about participating in this class. As the period continued, Maya noticed that Mrs. Hartford's teaching style was very traditional and formal. She spoke with authority about each composer and their works, but there was little room for discussion or different perspectives. When other students asked questions, Mrs. Hartford answered them with patience and encouragement. But Maya couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, evaluated in a way that felt different from how the teacher looked at her other students. The bell rang, ending Maya's first day at Riverside Academy. As she packed up her things, she reflected on how the day had gone. Most of it had been positive, even exciting. But something about that last interaction with Mrs. Hartford left her feeling unsettled. She couldn't tell if she was being overly sensitive, or if there had really been something dismissive in the teacher's response to her comment about Bach. Walking to her locker, Maya decided to give Mrs. Hartford the benefit of the doubt. After all, it was only the first day, and maybe the teacher was just trying to establish classroom expectations. Maya was determined to succeed at Riverside Academy, and she wouldn't let one uncomfortable moment derail her goals. She had worked too hard to get here to let anything stand in her way now. 3 weeks had passed since Maya's first day at Riverside Academy, and she had settled into a routine that felt both challenging and rewarding. Her grades were excellent across all subjects, and she had even made a few genuine friends. David continued tea. Be a reliable companion, and Lisa from her English class had invited her to join the debate team. For the most part, Maya felt like she was finding her place in this elite academic environment. However, music appreciation class remained a source of tension. Every Tuesday and Thursday, Maya would enter Mrs. Hartford's classroom with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She genuinely loved learning about classical music, but she had learned to keep her insights and observations to herself. Whenever she did speak up, Mrs. Hartford would respond with that same carefully neutral tone that somehow managed to make Maya feel like she was being put in her place. The other students in the class seemed to pick up on the dynamic between Maya and their teacher. Some, like David, would give Maya encouraging looks when Mrs. Hartford dismissed her comments. Others seemed uncomfortable with the tension but didn't know how to address it. A few students, unfortunately, seemed to enjoy the spectacle of watching Maya be subtly put down by the authority figure they had always known and respected. On this particular Thursday morning, Maya walked into music appreciation class to find Mrs. Hartford setting up a display of various string instruments. There was a violin, a viola, a cello, and even a small harp arranged on a table at the front of the classroom. Maya's heart began to beat a little faster. She had a complicated relationship with string instruments, particularly the violin, though none of her classmates knew about it. "Today we're going to learn about the string family," Mrs. Hartford announced as the students took their seats. These instruments form the backbone of any classical orchestra, and understanding their unique properties is essential to appreciating symphonic music. Maya tried to focus on taking notes as Mrs. Hartford explained the construction of each instrument, their ranges and their roles in different types of musical compositions, but her eyes kept drifting to the violin on the table. It was a beautiful instrument, its wood polished to a warm golden brown, and Maya found herself remembering the weight of a violin in her hands, the feel of the bow against the strings. "The violin is perhaps the most versatile of all string instruments," Mrs. Hartford continued, picking up the instrument with practiced ease. "It can produce the sweetest melodies or the most dramatic flourishes, but it's also one of the most difficult instruments to master. It takes years of dedicated practice to develop proper technique." Maya watched as Mrs. Hartford demonstrated how to hold the violin and bow properly. She noticed that the teacher's form was good but not perfect. Her bow hold was a little too tight and her violin position was slightly low. Maya caught herself making these observations and quickly looked down at her notebook, not wanting to appear critical. "Of course," Mrs. Hartford said, placing the violin back on the table. "Not everyone has the natural aptitude for string instruments. It requires a certain level of musical sensitivity and cultural background to truly excel." There it was again, that subtle suggestion that some people were naturally more suited to classical music than others. Maya felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her expression neutral and continued taking notes. As the class progressed, Mrs. Hartford called on various students to come up and examine the instruments. She asked them questions about what they observed and encouraged them to share their thoughts about how each instrument might sound different from the others. When she called on David, he made some thoughtful observations about how the size of the cello might affect its tone. When she called on Lisa, she talked about how the violin's higher pitch might make it suitable for melody lines. Maya waited for her turn, but the call never came. Mrs. Hartford seemed to deliberately avoid making eye contact with her, even when Maya raised her hand to volunteer. This pattern had become familiar over the past few weeks, but today it felt particularly pointed. Finally, as the class period was winding down, Mrs. Hartford's eyes landed on Maya with what appeared to be sudden inspiration. "Miss Johnson," she said, her voice carrying a tone that Maya couldn't quite identify. "You've been quite quiet today. Since you seem to have such strong opinions about classical music, why don't you come up here and show us what you know about the violin?" Maya's heart stopped. The classroom fell silent, and she could feel every pair of eyes turning toward her. There was something in Mrs. Hartford's tone that made this feel less like an educational opportunity and more like a challenge. Or worse, a trap. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Hartford," Maya said, hoping she had misunderstood. "Come up here," Mrs. Hartford repeated, gesturing toward the front of the classroom. "Pick up the violin and show us how it should be held. Since you're so knowledgeable about Bach's compositional techniques, surely you must have some familiarity with the instruments that play his music." Maya's mind raced. She could see the subtle smirk on Mrs. Hartford's face and suddenly understood what was happening. This wasn't about education at all. Mrs. Hartford was trying to humiliate her, to put her in a situation where she would fail in front of the entire class. The teacher expected Maya to fumble with the violin, to prove that her previous comments about classical music were just empty words from someone who didn't really belong in this world. "I don't think that's necessary," Maya said carefully, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm happy to just observe and learn from the demonstration." "Nonsense," Mrs. Hartford said, her tone becoming more insistent. "This is an interactive learning environment. I insist that you participate. After all, if you're going to make observations about classical music in my class, you should be willing to demonstrate your knowledge practically." Maya looked around the classroom and saw a mixture of expressions on her classmates' faces. David looked concerned and angry on her behalf. Lisa appeared uncomfortable with what was clearly becoming a confrontational situation. But several other students seemed curious to see what would happen, and a few even looked like they were anticipating entertainment. "Mrs. Hartford," Maya said, making one more attempt to avoid the situation, "I really don't think I should handle an instrument that belongs to the school without proper instruction." "Oh, don't worry about damaging it," Mrs. Hartford replied with false reassurance. "It's just an old practice instrument. And surely someone with your confidence about classical music can figure out how to hold a violin properly, unless, of course, you've been speaking about things you don't actually understand." The challenge was now explicit, and Maya realized she was trapped. If she continued to refuse, Mrs. Hartford would use it as evidence that Maya had been pretending to knowledge she didn't possess. It would undermine her credibility not just in this class, but potentially with other teachers and students who might hear about the incident. On the other hand, if she agreed to try and failed spectacularly, as Mrs. Hartford clearly expected, it would accomplish the same goal. Maya took a deep breath and stood up. The walk to the front of the classroom felt like the longest walk of her life. She could hear the quiet murmur of her classmates' voices as they whispered to each other about what was happening. Some were clearly uncomfortable with the situation, while others seemed excited by the drama unfolding before them. "Here you go," Mrs. Hartford said, holding out the violin with an expression that managed to be both encouraging and condescending at the same time. "Just do your best. I'm sure the class will be very understanding if you struggle a bit." Maya took the violin in her hands, and immediately several things became clear to her. First, the instrument was indeed old and had seen better days, but it was still a decent violin that was capable of producing beautiful music. Second, Mrs. Hartford had set it up to be as difficult as possible for a beginner. The strings were slightly out of tune, and the bridge was positioned in a way that would make it harder to produce clean sounds. More importantly, Maya realized that Mrs. Hartford had made a critical miscalculation. The teacher had assumed that Maya's knowledge of classical music was purely theoretical, picked up from books or casual listening. She had assumed that Maya, like most teenagers, would have no real experience with classical instruments. It was a reasonable assumption for Mrs. Hartford to make. But it was also completely wrong. "Take your time," Mrs. Hartford said, stepping back to give Maya room but staying close enough to maintain the pressure of the situation. "Remember, the bow goes in your right hand and you rest the violin on your left shoulder. Don't worry if it feels awkward at first." Maya looked down at the violin in her hands and then up at Mrs. Hartford's expectant face. Around the classroom, her fellow students watched with a mixture of sympathy, curiosity, and anticipation. The moment stretched out, filled with tension and possibility. This was it. This was the moment that would define how she was seen at Riverside Academy. Mrs. Hartford had created this situation to put Maya in her place, to demonstrate that the scholarship student didn't really belong in their refined world of classical music and cultural sophistication. The teacher expected Maya to fumble with the instrument, to produce scratchy, unpleasant sounds that would embarrass her and validate Mrs. Hartford's subtle prejudices. Maya adjusted her grip on the violin and bow, taking a moment to check the tuning of the strings with quick, precise plucks. She noticed Mrs. Hartford's eyebrows raise slightly at this action. It suggested a level of familiarity with the instrument, and that the teacher hadn't expected. "Whenever you're ready," Mrs. Hartford said, but her voice now carried a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there before. Maya positioned the violin against her shoulder and raised the bow. The classroom was completely silent now, everyone holding their breath for what was about to happen. This was the moment of truth, and Maya knew that whatever came next would change everything. She looked directly at Mrs. Hartford, meeting her teacher's eyes with a gaze that was calm and confident. Then she smiled, not the nervous, apologetic smile that Mrs. Hartford expected, but the quiet, knowing smile of someone who was about to reveal a secret that would surprise everyone in the room. "Are you sure you want me to play?" Maya asked quietly, giving Mrs. Hartford one last chance to back down from the confrontation she had initiated. But Mrs. Hartford had gone too far to retreat now. "Of course," she said. "Show us what you can do." Maya nodded and took a deep breath. Around the room, 24 students waited to see what would happen next. Most expected embarrassment and failure. A few hoped for something better, and Mrs. Hartford stood there with her arms crossed, completely confident that she was about to prove a point about cultural sophistication and knowing one's place. None of them were prepared for what Maya was about to do. Maya drew the bow across the strings, and the first note that emerged from the violin was pure and clear, cutting through the silence of the classroom like a beam of light. It wasn't the scratchy, uncertain sound that Mrs. Hartford had expected. Instead, it was the confident, controlled tone of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The opening measures of Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto in E minor filled the room, and Maya watched as Mrs. Hartford's expression changed from smug anticipation to confusion, then to something approaching shock. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, each note perfectly placed and executed with the kind of technical precision that only comes from years of serious study and practice. Maya's fingers moved across the fingerboard with fluid grace, finding each position with the automatic accuracy of muscle memory, developed through countless hours of practice. Her vibrato was controlled and expressive, adding warmth and emotion to every sustained note. The bow moved across the strings with perfect technique, producing a rich, singing tone that filled the acoustically excellent music room. Around the classroom, Maya could see her classmates' faces changing as they realized what they were witnessing. David's mouth had fallen open in amazement. Lisa was leaning forward in her seat, completely captivated by the music. Even the students who had been looking forward to Maya's embarrassment were now staring, in awe at the incredible performance unfolding before them. But it was Mrs. Hartford's reaction that fascinated Maya the most. The teacher's face had gone pale, and her arms had dropped to her sides. The confident, superior expression she had worn moments before had been replaced by something that looked almost like fear. Mrs. Hartford was beginning to understand that she had made a terrible miscalculation. Maya moved into the more technically demanding sections of the concerto. Her playing became even more impressive. The rapid passages that would challenge even accomplished violinists flowed effortlessly under her fingers. She navigated complex scales and arpeggios with the ease of someone for whom such techniques were second nature. Her intonation was flawless, her rhythm steady and musical. Then, without pause, Maya transitioned into something even more challenging. The opening notes of Paganini's Caprice No. 24 began to dance through the air, and several students gasped audibly. This was one of the most difficult pieces in the entire violin repertoire, a work that separated true virtuosos from merely competent players. The fact that a 17-year-old student was playing it with such confidence and skill was almost beyond belief. Maya's technique in the Paganini was absolutely stunning. The lightning-fast passages that had intimidated violinists for over 2 centuries seemed to flow naturally from her fingers. The double stops, playing 2 notes simultaneously on different strings, were perfectly balanced and in tune. The harmonics sparkled like crystalline bells, and the complex bowing patterns that created the piece's distinctive rhythmic drive were executed flawlessly. As she played, Maya was aware of her surroundings but completely immersed in the music. This was what she had missed most since starting at Riverside Academy. The opportunity to express herself through her instrument, to lose herself in the mathematical beauty of great compositions, to communicate emotions and ideas that words could never capture. The music room's excellent acoustics enhanced every nuance of her playing. The violin's voice soared and whispered, danced and sang, painting pictures in sound that left her audience completely spellbound. Maya could see phones appearing as students began recording the performance. Their faces lit up with excitement and disbelief. Mrs. Hartford remained frozen at the front of the classroom, watching her assumptions crumble with every passing measure. This wasn't just competent playing. This was the kind of artistry and technical mastery that she had spent her entire career studying and teaching about. The scholarship student she had tried to humiliate was demonstrating a level of musical sophistication that exceeded her own abilities. As Maya approached the climax of the Paganini Caprice, the music became even more intense and dramatic. The rapid-fire notes cascaded from the violin like a waterfall of sound, each one crisp and clear despite the incredible speed. Her left hand flew up and down the fingerboard in patterns that seemed impossible to execute, while her right hand controlled the bow with microscopic precision. The other students in the classroom were completely mesmerized. Some were recording on their phones, but most were simply listening with their full attention, recognizing that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Several had tears in their eyes, moved by the raw emotion and beauty of Maya's playing. Others looked stunned, as if they couldn't quite believe what they were hearing. David was grinning broadly, pumping his fist quietly in celebration of his friend's incredible moment. He had known Maya was special, but he had never imagined she possessed this kind of talent. Lisa had her hands pressed to her mouth in amazement, her eyes wide with wonder and admiration. Even the students who had seemed eager to see Maya fail were now completely won over by the performance. There was something about great music that transcended petty prejudices and social divisions. In that moment, they weren't seeing the scholarship student or the girl who looked different from them. They were witnessing pure artistic brilliance. As Maya moved toward the final section of the Caprice, she allowed herself to make eye contact with Mrs. Hartford. The teacher's face was a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and what might have been the beginning of understanding. Mrs. Hartford had spent her career teaching about musical excellence, but she was now confronted with the reality of it in a form she had never expected. The concluding passages of the Paganini required every ounce of technical skill Maya possessed. The complex combinations of techniques, rapid scales, difficult string crossings, challenging harmonics, and intricate bowing patterns all had to come together in perfect coordination. Maya executed them flawlessly, her years of training and natural talent combining to create something truly magical. As she approached the final measures, Maya decided to add her own interpretive touch. She slowed the tempo slightly, allowing each note to ring with maximum expression and impact. The last few phrases became a statement of artistic authority and confidence, a declaration that she belonged in any musical conversation. The final chord rang out in the suddenly silent classroom, vibrating in the air for several seconds before fading away. Maya lowered the violin and bow, her breathing slightly elevated from the intensity of the performance, but her expression calm and composed. She had just delivered one of the most impressive musical performances in the history of Riverside Academy, and she knew it. For a moment, the classroom remained completely silent. Students stared at Maya with expressions of awe and disbelief. Mrs. Hartford stood frozen, her mouth slightly open, struggling to process what had just happened. The silence stretched on, filled with the weight of realization and the echoes of extraordinary music. Then David started clapping. His applause was immediately joined by Lisa, and within seconds the entire classroom erupted in thunderous applause. Students were on their feet, cheering and whistling their appreciation. Several were wiping away tears, still moved by the emotional power of Maya's performance. Others were shaking their heads in amazement, unable to fully comprehend the level of skill they had just witnessed. Maya accepted the applause with gracious composure, nodding her thanks to her classmates while carefully placing the violin and bow back on the table. She had proven her point more decisively than she could have ever imagined. The girl who Mrs. Hartford had tried to embarrass and humiliate had just delivered a masterclass in violin performance. Mrs. Hartford finally found her voice, though it was shaky and uncertain. That was quite impressive, Miss Johnson," she managed, her tone completely different from the condescending attitude she had displayed just minutes before. Maya looked directly at her teacher, her expression polite, but confident. "Thank you, Mrs. Hartford. I hope that was helpful for the class's understanding of string instruments." The response was perfectly respectful, but everyone in the room understood the subtle message it contained. Maya had not only met Mrs. Hartford's challenge, she had exceeded it so dramatically that the power dynamic in the classroom had fundamentally shifted. As the applause continued, Maya could see her classmates looking at her with new eyes. She was no longer just the scholarship student or the girl who had made some insightful comments about Bach. She was now someone who had demonstrated extraordinary talent and grace under pressure. She had shown them all what it meant to rise above attempts at humiliation and respond with excellence. The bell rang, signaling the end of class, but no one moved immediately. Students were still processing what they had witnessed, still trying to reconcile the incredible performance with their previous assumptions about their classmate. Slowly, they began to gather their things, many stopping to congratulate Maya on her amazing playing. As Maya packed up her backpack, she reflected on what had just happened. Mrs. Hartford's attempt to embarrass her had backfired spectacularly, but Maya took no pleasure in her teacher's discomfort. Instead, she felt a sense of relief that she could finally be her authentic self at Riverside Academy. The secret she had been keeping was now out in the open, and she no longer had to hide such an important part of who she was. Mrs. Hartford remained at the front of the classroom as students filed out, still looking shaken by the turn of events. Maya could see that her teacher was struggling with the realization that she had seriously misjudged her student. The confrontation that was supposed to put Maya in her place had instead revealed the depth of Mrs. Hartford's own prejudices and assumptions. As Maya headed toward the door, she knew that everything at Riverside Academy was about to change. Word of her performance would spread quickly through the school, and she would no longer be able to blend into the background as just another student. But for the first time since arriving at the academy, she felt truly confident about her place there. She had proven that talent and excellence could come from anywhere, and that making assumptions about people based on their background was not only wrong, but potentially embarrassing for those who chose to act on those assumptions. Maya had shown her classmates and her teacher that she belonged at Riverside Academy not because of anyone's charity or lowered standards, but because she possessed abilities that were truly exceptional. The performance was over, but its impact was just beginning. Within an hour of Maya's incredible performance, the entire atmosphere at Riverside Academy had shifted. Students who had been in the music room were excitedly telling their friends about what they had witnessed. Videos of Maya playing were already circulating on social media, capturing the attention of not just their classmates but people far beyond the school's walls. Maya found herself at the center of attention in a way she had never experienced before. As she walked through the hallways, students she had never spoken to approached her with congratulations and questions. Teachers stopped her to express their amazement and curiosity about her musical background. The girl who had spent 3 weeks trying to blend into the background was now the most talked about student in the school. During lunch, Maya's usual quiet table became a gathering spot for curious classmates. David sat beside her with a huge grin on his face, clearly proud of his friend's moment of triumph. Lisa joined them, still shaking her head in disbelief at what she had witnessed in music class. "Maya, that was absolutely incredible," Lisa said for the third time. "I mean, I knew you were smart, but I had no idea you could play like that. How long have you been playing violin?" Maya had been dreading this question, knowing that once people started asking about her musical background, the full story would have to come out. She had hoped to keep her musical life separate from her academic life at Riverside Academy. But Mrs. Hartford's challenge had made that impossible. "Since I was 4 years old," Maya answered quietly, aware that more students were gathering around their table to listen to her story. 4 years old?" said Kevin, a boy from her calculus class. "That's 13 years of training. No wonder you played like a professional. Where did you study? Do you perform regularly?" Maya took a deep breath, realizing that there was no point in trying to maintain her privacy any longer. The videos of her performance were already going viral, and people would find out the truth whether she shared it or not. She might as well control the narrative herself. "I've been studying with Master Chen at the Metropolitan Music Conservatory," she said. "I've performed with several youth orchestras, and I've been competing in national violin competitions since I was 8 years old." The students around the table exchanged glances of amazement. The Metropolitan Music Conservatory was one of the most prestigious music schools in the country. Master Chen was a legendary teacher whose students regularly went on to perform with major orchestras around the world. "Wait," said David, putting the pieces together. "Is that why your family moved here? To be closer to the conservatory?" Maya nodded. "My parents made a lot of sacrifices so I could study with Master Chen. When I got accepted to Riverside Academy, it seemed like the perfect opportunity to get an excellent academic education while continuing my music training." "What kind of competitions have you won?" asked another student, clearly impressed by what he was learning about his classmate. Maya felt uncomfortable talking about her achievements. but she knew that people would find out anyway once they started looking into her background. I won the National Youth Violin Competition when I was 14. I was the youngest winner in the competition's history. I've also placed first in several regional competitions, and last year I was selected as a soloist with the State Youth Symphony. The students around the table were staring at her with new respect and understanding. They were beginning to realize that Maya wasn't just a scholarship student who happened to be academically talented. She was a serious musician with credentials that rivaled those of professional performers. "Have you played in famous venues?" Lisa asked, her eyes wide with curiosity. Maya hesitated, then decided there was no point in holding back now. "I performed at Carnegie Hall when I was 14, as part of the winner's concert for the national competition. I've also played at the Kennedy Center and several other major venues." A hush fell over the group. Carnegie Hall was one of the most prestigious concert venues in the world. The fact that Maya had performed there as a teenager was almost beyond their comprehension. Suddenly, her confident comments about Bach's compositional techniques in Mrs. Hartford's class made perfect sense. "This is incredible," David said, shaking his head. "Maya, why didn't you tell us about any of this? I mean, performing at Carnegie Hall is amazing." Maya looked around at the faces of her classmates, trying to read their expressions. She could see admiration and respect, but also curiosity about why she had kept such an important part of her life secret. "I wanted to be seen as more than just the musical prodigy," Maya explained. "I've been labeled that way my whole life, and I wanted to experience being a normal teenager for once. I wanted people to get to know me as a person, not just as someone who could play violin." Her explanation resonated with several of the students, who nodded in understanding. They could imagine how exhausting it might be to always be defined by a single talent, no matter how extraordinary. As word continued to spread throughout the school, Maya found herself fielding questions from teachers as well as students. Mrs. Rodriguez, her English teacher, approached her after class with a look of amazement on her face. "Maya, I just heard about what happened in music class today," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "I had no idea we had such an accomplished musician in our school. Your performance sounds absolutely incredible." "Thank you, Mrs. Rodriguez," Maya replied, still adjusting to all the attention she was receiving. "I have to ask, with your level of musical achievement, what are your plans after graduation? Are you planning to pursue music professionally?" It was a question that Maya had been grappling with for months. She loved music deeply, but she also had strong interests in other fields. The academic opportunities at Riverside Academy had opened up new possibilities for her future that she was still exploring. "I'm not sure yet," Maya answered honestly. "I love music, but I'm also passionate about mathematics and science. I'm hoping to find a way to combine my interests, maybe studying music technology or acoustics in college." Mrs. Rodriguez smiled approvingly. "That sounds like a wonderful plan. It's clear that you have the talent and discipline to succeed in whatever field you choose." Similar conversations continued throughout the day. Teachers who had known Maya as a bright, hard-working student were now seeing her in an entirely new light. They began to understand that her insights in class came not just from intelligence, but from the deep analytical thinking that serious musical training had developed in her. By the end of the school day, news of Maya's performance had reached the administration. Principal Williams called Maya to his office not to reprimand her, but to congratulate her on bringing such positive attention to the school. "Miss Johnson," Principal Williams said, as Maya entered his office, "I understand you gave quite a performance in music class today. The videos are already getting thousands of views online and people are asking about our music program." Maya felt a moment of worry. "I hope I haven't caused any problems, sir. Mrs. Hartford asked me to demonstrate and I just did what she requested." Principal Williams smiled warmly. "You haven't caused any problems at all. In fact, you've done something wonderful for Riverside Academy. You've shown that our students possess extraordinary talents that extend far beyond what people might expect. I'm very proud to have you as part of our school community." He paused, then continued with a more serious expression. "I do want to discuss what led up to your performance, though. I've heard some concerning reports about the circumstances that prompted Mrs. Hartford to ask you to play." Maya chose her words carefully. While she had been hurt by Mrs. Hartford's obvious attempt to embarrass her, she didn't want to get her teacher in serious trouble. Mrs. Hartford was teaching about string instruments, and she asked me to demonstrate proper violin technique. I understand that she wanted to make the lesson more interactive. Principal Williams studied Maya's face, clearly recognizing that she was being diplomatic about what had actually occurred. I see. Well, regardless of the circumstances, your performance was remarkable. I hope you'll consider sharing your musical talents with the school community in the future. Perhaps you'd be interested in performing at our winter concert. Maya felt a surge of excitement at the suggestion. The winter concert was one of the most important events on Riverside Academy's calendar, typically featuring guest performers in the school's most advanced musicians. I would be honored to perform at the winter concert, sir, Maya said sincerely. As Maya left the principal's office, she reflected on how dramatically her situation at Riverside Academy had changed in just one day. This morning, she had been the scholarship student trying to keep her head down and avoid drawing attention to herself. Now she was being celebrated as a remarkable talent who brought prestige to the school. The change wasn't just in how others saw her, but in how she saw herself within the school community. For the first time since arriving at Riverside Academy, Maya felt like she truly belonged. She had proven that excellence could come from unexpected places, and that making assumptions about people based on their background was both unfair and potentially embarrassing. But perhaps most importantly, Maya had learned something about herself. She had discovered that hiding important parts of who she was in order to fit in was not only unnecessary but counterproductive. Her musical talent was an integral part of her identity, and trying to suppress it had only made her feel disconnected from her authentic self. As she walked toward her locker at the end of the day, Maya knew that her time at Riverside Academy would be different from now on. She would no longer try to blend into the background or downplay her abilities. Instead, she would embrace all aspects of her identity, her academic excellence, her musical talent, and her unique perspective as someone who had overcome significant challenges to earn her place at this elite institution. The scholarship student who had worried about fitting in was gone. In her place was a confident young woman who understood that her differences were not weaknesses to be hidden, but strengths that could inspire and educate others. Maya had found her voice at Riverside Academy, both literally and figuratively, and she was ready to use it to make a positive impact on her school community. The truth about Maya Johnson was finally out in the open, and it was more impressive than anyone could have imagined. The video of Maya's performance spread far beyond the walls of Riverside Academy. Within 2 days, it had been viewed over 500,000 times across various social media platforms. News outlets picked up the story, framing it as an inspiring tale of talent overcoming prejudice and assumptions. The hashtag Violin Genius began trending, and Maya found herself thrust into a spotlight she had never anticipated. But the most significant changes were happening much closer to home. Within the halls and classrooms of Riverside Academy itself, Maya's revelation had sparked conversations about talent, opportunity, and the dangers of making assumptions about people based on their background or appearance. Mrs. Hartford had called in sick the day after Maya's performance, claiming she needed time to process what had happened. When she returned to school 3 days later, she looked like a woman who had spent considerable time in deep reflection. Her usual confident demeanor was replaced by something more humble and uncertain. The administration had required Mrs. Hartford to attend sensitivity training sessions, but the real change in her seemed to come from within. She had spent her career believing that she could identify musical potential and cultural sophistication at a glance, and Maya's performance had shattered those assumptions completely. On Monday morning, as students filed into music appreciation class, there was a palpable tension in the air. Everyone wondered how Mrs. Hartford would address what had happened, and how the dynamic between her and Maya would play out going forward. Mrs. Hartford stood at the front of the classroom, her hands clasped in front of her, looking more vulnerable than anyone had ever seen her. She waited for complete silence before beginning to speak. "Class, before we continue with our curriculum, I need to address what happened last Thursday," she began, her voice lacking its usual authoritative tone. "I owe all of you, but especially Miss Johnson, an apology." Maya felt her classmates' eyes turning toward her, but she kept her focus on Mrs. Hartford, curious to hear what her teacher would say. "I made assumptions about Miss Johnson based on factors that had nothing to do with her musical knowledge or abilities," Mrs. Hartford continued. "I challenged her to demonstrate her familiarity with the violin, not as an educational exercise, but because I believed she would fail and I wanted to prove a point that I now realize was rooted in my own prejudices. The classroom was completely silent. Students had never heard a teacher speak so candidly about their mistakes, and Mrs. Hartford's honesty was both surprising and powerful. What Miss Johnson demonstrated through her extraordinary performance was not just exceptional musical talent, but grace under pressure and dignity in the face of unfair treatment. She responded to my attempt to embarrass her by sharing her remarkable gift with all of us, and for that I am deeply grateful. Mrs. Hartford looked directly at Maya, her eyes reflecting genuine remorse and respect. Miss Johnson, I cannot undo the discomfort I caused you or take back the assumptions I made, but I want you to know that I am committed to learning from this experience and becoming a better teacher and a better person. Would you accept my apology? Maya could see that Mrs. Hartford's words were sincere. The teacher's willingness to acknowledge her mistakes publicly and take responsibility for her actions demonstrated real character and a genuine desire to change. I accept your apology. Mrs. Hartford, Maya said simply. We all make mistakes, and what matters is how we learn from them. The exchange seemed to lift a weight from the entire classroom. Students who had been uncomfortable with the tension between Maya and Mrs. Hartford looked relieved, and several nodded approvingly at Maya's gracious response. From that day forward, music appreciation class became a completely different experience. Mrs. Hartford's teaching style evolved to become more inclusive and collaborative. She encouraged all students to share their perspectives and experiences with music, regardless of their formal training or background. When Maya offered insights about compositional techniques or historical context, Mrs. Hartford listened respectfully and often asked follow-up questions that helped deepen the entire class's understanding. The adversarial dynamic that had characterized their early interactions was replaced by genuine intellectual partnership. But the changes at Riverside Academy extended far beyond one classroom. Maya's story had prompted school-wide discussions about diversity, inclusion, and the importance of not making assumptions about students based on their backgrounds. Principal Williams organized a series of assemblies focused on celebrating the diverse talents and perspectives within the student body. Students were encouraged to share their unique abilities and interests, leading to discoveries of hidden talents throughout the school. Community, the debate team that Lisa had invited Maya to join, became more diverse and dynamic as students from different backgrounds felt empowered to participate. The school newspaper ran a series of articles exploring the experiences of scholarship students and students from underrepresented communities. Most significantly, Maya's performance had inspired other students to embrace aspects of themselves they had previously kept hidden. A student who was an accomplished dancer but had never auditioned for school productions found the courage to try out for the spring musical. And another student who wrote poetry in his native language started a multicultural literary magazine. As winter approached, preparations began for the annual winter concert. Maya was asked to be the featured soloist, an honor typically reserved for guest professionals or distinguished alumni. She spent weeks working with Mrs. Hartford and the school's music department to prepare a program that would showcase both her technical abilities and her musical maturity. The concert was scheduled for the first Friday evening in December. As word spread about Maya's participation, ticket sales exceeded all expectations. Parents, students, faculty, and community members all wanted to witness the performance of the young violinist who had captured the internet's attention. On the night of the concert, Maya stood backstage in the school's beautiful auditorium, listening to the sounds of hundreds of people taking their seats. She felt nervous but also excited and grateful for the opportunity to share her music with the community that had come to embrace her so completely. Mrs. Hartford approached her just before the performance was set to begin. Maya, I want you to know how proud I am to introduce you tonight, she said. Your talent is extraordinary, but your character is what truly makes you remarkable. Maya smiled warmly at her teacher. Thank you, Mrs. Hartford. I'm honored to perform for everyone tonight. As the lights dimmed and Maya walked onto the stage, she was greeted by thunderous applause. She could see her parents in the front row, their faces glowing with pride and emotion. David and Lisa were there with their families, along with most of her classmates and teachers. Maya had chosen to perform a piece she had composed herself, inspired by her experiences at Riverside Academy. She called it Finding My Voice, and it told the story of someone discovering their place in a new community through both struggle and triumph. The music began softly, representing the uncertainty and isolation Maya had felt during her first weeks at the school. As the piece progressed, it grew more confident and complex, incorporating themes that represented her friendships, her academic achievements, and ultimately, her moment of revelation in Mrs. Hartford's classroom. The composition was technically demanding, but also deeply emotional. Maya poured all of her experiences at Riverside Academy into the performance, creating music that spoke to anyone who had ever felt like an outsider or struggled to find their place in a new environment. As she played, Maya could see the audience completely captivated by the music. Some people were leaning forward in their seats, others had tears streaming down their faces. The piece built to a powerful climax that represented not just Maya's personal triumph, but the triumph of anyone who had overcome prejudice and assumptions to claim their rightful place in the world. The final notes faded into silence, and for a moment the auditorium was completely still. Then the audience erupted in the longest standing ovation in the history of Riverside Academy's winter concert. People cheered and applauded for several minutes, many wiping away tears and calling out their appreciation. Maya took her bow gracefully, her heart full of gratitude for the journey that had brought her to this moment. She looked out at the audience and saw faces that reflected pride, admiration, and genuine affection. These were no longer strangers who might judge her based on her background or appearance. They were her community, and they were celebrating not just her musical talent but everything she represented. After the concert, Maya was surrounded by well-wishers and congratulations. College recruiters who had heard about her performance approached with scholarship offers from prestigious universities. Music teachers from around the region expressed interest in working with her, but perhaps most meaningful to Maya was the group of younger students from local schools who had attended the concert with their families. They approached her with shy smiles and questions about how they could develop their own musical talents. Maya realized that her story had the power to inspire others who might be facing similar challenges or hiding their own gifts. In the months that followed, Maya's impact on Riverside Academy continued to grow. She started a mentorship program for younger musicians from diverse backgrounds, helping them navigate the sometimes intimidating world of classical music education. She also worked with the administration to create more inclusive policies and practices throughout the school. Mrs. Hartford became one of Maya's strongest supporters and advocates. The teacher's transformation from someone who made harmful assumptions to someone who actively promoted inclusion and diversity became a model for other educators throughout the district. As Maya's senior year progressed, she received acceptance letters from several top universities, including offers to study at conservatories and programs that would allow her to combine her musical talents with her academic interests in mathematics and science. On graduation day, Maya was selected as the valedictorian, not just because of her academic achievements but because of the positive impact she had made on the entire school community. Her speech focused on the importance of not letting others' assumptions limit your potential and the power of responding to prejudice with excellence and grace. As she stood at the podium, looking out at her classmates and their families, Maya reflected on how much had changed since that difficult day in Mrs. Hartford's classroom. What had begun as an attempt to humiliate her had ultimately become the catalyst for positive change throughout her school and community. Maya had learned that true belonging doesn't come from hiding who you are to fit in with others' expectations. Instead, it comes from having the courage to be authentically yourself and the persistence to prove your worth through your actions and character. The girl who had once worried about being seen as different was now celebrated for the unique perspective and extraordinary talents she brought to her community. Maya Johnson had found her voice at Riverside Academy, and she would carry the confidence and strength she had developed there into whatever challenges and opportunities awaited her in the future. Her story became a reminder that talent and excellence can emerge from anywhere, and that the assumptions we make about others often say more about our own limitations than about the people we're judging. Through her music, her character, and her courage, Maya had transformed not just her own experience but the experiences of countless others who would follow in her footsteps.